China is enormous, not just in population, but in sheer landmass. It stretches from the frozen tundra of Heilongjiang to the tropical jungles of Yunnan, from the deserts of Xinjiang to the skyscrapers of Shanghai. Covering nearly 9.6 million square kilometers, it stands as the third largest country in the world, trailing only Russia and Canada. Yet, this massive expanse is not a single uniform whole. The modern People's Republic of China encompasses territories home to dozens of ethnic groups, each with their own histories, languages, and identities. Tibetans, Uyghurs, Mongolians, Zhuang, Hui, and many more call this land their ancestral home, but their relationship with the Chinese state has not always been harmonious. While today's China presents itself as a single unified nation, the truth is far more complex. Many of its western and northern regions, such as Tibet, Xinjiang, and Inner Mongolia, were not always part of what we think of as China. These territories were once independent realms, rich with their own cultures, rulers, and destinies. So how did all these vast, diverse lands come under one flag? How did a civilization that began along the narrow valleys of the Yellow River expand to become one of the largest and most powerful states on Earth? To understand that, we must journey through thousands of years of history, through conquests, diplomacy, colonization, and cultural fusion. We must trace the transformation of a river valley civilization into a continental empire. In this video, we will uncover how China became so big, how it expanded from its ancient core in the east to encompass half a continent, absorbing countless peoples and kingdoms along the way. But before the Qing emperors brought the high plateaus of Tibet and the deserts of Xinjiang under their rule, before the Great Wall snaked across the northern frontier, before China was even China, there was only a cluster of warring states, small agricultural kingdoms along the banks of a muddy river. And from there, the story begins. The origins of Chinese civilization and early expansion. Emerging from the mists of antiquity, Chinese civilization was born in the fertile plains of the Yellow River Valley, where human settlement first flourished around 5,000 years ago. It was here, along the winding waters of the Huanghe, that the earliest Chinese dynasties, the Xia, Shang, and Zhao, laid the foundations of a civilization that would one day become one of the longest continuous cultures on Earth. At first, China was not a single, unified state, but a mosaic of tribes, small kingdoms, and feudal domains. The concept of China as a coherent civilization, what the ancients called the Middle Kingdom, or Zhongguo, developed slowly, born out of centuries of war, alliance, and assimilation. Over time, these early states shared a growing sense of cultural unity rooted in a few key ideas: Confucian order, ancestor worship, and a written language that linked the literate elite across vast distances. As centuries passed, these riverine societies expanded outward. The Chinese people, or what would eventually become the Han ethnic majority, gradually absorbed neighboring tribes through migration, intermarriage, and conquest. The small kingdoms that had once been confined to the river valleys began to push toward the mountains, forests, and plains beyond. The earliest Chinese rulers justified this expansion through a powerful philosophical concept: the mandate of heaven, the belief that heaven itself granted emperors the divine right to rule, so long as they governed with virtue and justice. This ideology didn't just legitimize a dynasty's power, it provided a spiritual framework for territorial expansion. To bring new lands and new peoples into the fold of Chinese civilization was not seen as conquest, but a moral duty, the extension of civilization over chaos. By the Qin dynasty in the 3rd century BCE, that vision had begun to take physical shape. The warlord Qin Shi Huang after unifying the 7 warring states in 221 BCE, crowned himself the first emperor of a united China. He built massive networks of roads and canals, standardized weights, measures, and writing, and began constructing what would later become the Great Wall, a defensive barrier against the nomadic horsemen who threatened China's northern frontier. The empire born under the Qin was the first to bring together the eastern heartland of China under a single ruler. But even then, the boundaries of China were far smaller than they are today. The lands of Tibet, Xinjiang, and Mongolia were still far beyond the reach of the imperial court. The Qin's domain was limited to the agricultural zones along the Yellow and Yangtze rivers, the fertile cradle where Chinese civilization had first taken root. It was during the Han Dynasty, 206 BCE to 210 CE, that China's expansion truly began to accelerate. Under the Han emperors, China's armies pushed westward into the Tarim Basin, establishing the Silk Road and bringing distant lands like modern-day Gansu and parts of Xinjiang into China's sphere of influence. Han generals such as Jiang Chan ventured deep into Central Asia, forging alliances with Western kingdoms and laying the groundwork for trade that would connect China to the Mediterranean world. But even as Han armies marched across deserts and mountains, their hold on these regions remained fragile. The vast steppes beyond the Great Wall were home to powerful nomadic confederations, the Xiongnu, precursors to the later Mongols, who launched devastating raids into northern China. For centuries, Chinese emperors found themselves locked in a recurring cycle, fortifying the frontier, losing it, and reclaiming it again. From the fall of the Han Dynasty onward, the empire fractured and reunited countless times, through the Three Kingdoms, the Tang, the Song, and beyond. Each dynasty pushed the borders slightly outward, assimilating new peoples and regions, yet the fundamental challenge remained the same: how to maintain control over a vast, diverse landmass surrounded by powerful neighbors. To the east and south, China was bounded by natural barriers, the Pacific Ocean and tropical jungles. But to the north and west, the land opened into a limitless sea of grasslands, deserts, and mountains. These were the lands of the horsemen, Mongols, Turks, and Tibetans, peoples whose mobility and warfare skills made them both formidable enemies and tempting allies. Throughout the millennia, the central question of Chinese foreign policy revolved around these frontiers. Should China defend itself behind great walls, or should it conquer the nomads beyond them? The former approach was safer, but temporary. The latter promised long-term security, but only through risky, costly campaigns in unfamiliar terrain.
Most Chinese dynasties chose the safer path: containment. They built fortifications, paid tribute, and engaged in diplomacy. But every few centuries, a powerful dynasty would rise, one ambitious enough to believe it could subdue the barbarians beyond the frontier once and for all. And in time, one of them would succeed. That dynasty would not be Chinese in origin, yet it would rule the largest version of China the world had ever seen. It would expand the borders of the Middle Kingdom into Tibet, Xinjiang, and Mongolia, turning China from a river civilization into a continental empire. This would be the rise of the Great Qing dynasty, and it would change the map of Asia forever. The rise of the Qing dynasty, conquest from the north. The dynasty that would expand China to its greatest historical extent did not begin within China at all. It began beyond the Great Wall, in the frigid forests and river valleys of Manchuria, homeland of a people known as the Jurchens. For centuries, the Jurchens had lived as semi-nomadic hunters and farmers in the northeast, occupying the lands between Korea and Siberia. They were not Han Chinese, but a distinct ethnic group with their own language, customs, and warrior traditions. In the early 16th century, amid the declining years of the Ming Dynasty, one Jurchen leader rose to unite his people and forge a new destiny. His name was Nurhaci. Nurhaci, a brilliant warlord and statesman, consolidated the Jurchen tribes under his rule in 1616, founding what he called the later Jin state. To distinguish his people from their tribal past, he renamed them the Manchus, a new name for a rising nation. Under his leadership, the Manchus built a formidable military organization known as the Eight Banners, a social and martial system that divided the population into hereditary military units, each responsible for providing soldiers, horses, and supplies. The Manchu banners were not only disciplined and well-armed, but also versatile, combining the mounted archery of the steppe nomads with the administrative sophistication of the Chinese. This hybrid system gave the Manchus an edge over their rivals and set the stage for an astonishing conquest. Meanwhile, within China proper, the Ming Dynasty was collapsing. Years of corruption, famine, and rebellion had shattered the imperial administration. In 1644, as a massive peasant revolt known as the Li Zichang Rebellion swept across the empire, the Ming capital of Beijing fell. Faced with chaos, Ming generals stationed on the northern frontier made a fateful choice. They invited the Manchus across the Great Wall to help suppress the rebellion. The Manchus seized the opportunity with ruthless efficiency. Once inside, they turned on their allies, crushed the rebels, and claimed the Dragon Throne for themselves. Thus, in 1644, the Qing dynasty was born, a dynasty founded not by the Han Chinese majority, but by the foreign conquerors from Manchuria. Within a few decades, the Qing emperors had subdued the remaining Ming loyalists, bringing all of China under their control. But unlike the Mongol Yuan dynasty before them, the Manchus did not simply plunder and leave. They built a durable state, blending Chinese bureaucratic traditions with their own martial culture. They learned the Chinese language, adopted Confucian court rituals, and presented themselves as legitimate heirs to heaven's mandate. However, the Manchus understood something that most Chinese dynasties before them had not. To secure China, they had to secure Inner Asia. The steppes and deserts to the north and west, lands of Mongols, Tibetans, and Turkic peoples, had always been the source of invasions and instability. The Manchus knew this well. After all, they had themselves come beyond the wall. And so, instead of adopting a purely defensive stance, the Qing emperors chose offense. Their goal was not merely to defend China's borders, but to erase the frontier itself, to bring the lands of the nomads under permanent imperial rule. Over the next century and a half, the Qing would conquer more territory than any dynasty in Chinese history. Their empire would stretch from the Pacific Ocean to the Pamir Mountains, from the jungles of Vietnam to the frozen edge of Siberia. It would encompass Tibet, Mongolia, and Xinjiang, the very regions that still define China's vast size today. But this expansion was not inevitable. It was the result of deliberate strategy, military innovation, and shrewd diplomacy. And at the heart of it all lay one central challenge: the Mongols. For centuries, the Mongols had been the nightmare of China. They had once conquered the entire country and built an empire that reached Europe. Even in the 16th century, long after the fall of the Yuan dynasty, the Mongols remained a divided yet dangerous force scattered across Inner Asia. To secure the northern frontier, the Qing had to subdue them, and in doing so, they would begin the largest expansion in Chinese history. The early Qing emperors, Nurhaci's successors Hong Taiji and Kangxi, launched a series of campaigns to bring the Mongols under their control. This campaign would unfold in stages, first with Inner Mongolia, then Outer Mongolia, and finally the vast western lands of Jungaria and Xinjiang. By combining superior organization, mastery of steppe warfare, and clever diplomacy, the Qing would transform China from a sedentary agricultural empire to a continental power. And the key to that transformation would lie in how they handled their Mongol neighbors, through both conquest and cooperation. The next stage of China's expansion was about to begin.
The Mongol campaigns, conquering the northern steppes. The Qing emperors knew that to rule China securely, they had to control the northern steppes, the cradle of the horsemen who had terrorized Chinese dynasties for over 2,000 years. The Great Wall had never been enough. Its stones could not stop cavalry, and its towers could not guard an empire forever. Only by subduing the Mongols themselves could the Qing ensure that China would never again be conquered from the north. The campaign to pacify the Mongols began even before the Manchus fully conquered China. In the 1620s, a fierce Mongol leader named Ligdan Khan rose among the Chahar Mongols of southern Mongolia. Dreaming of restoring the old empire of Chinggis Khan, Ligdan sought to unite the scattered Mongol tribes under his rule. He envisioned himself as the rightful heir of the great Khan, a vision that placed him in direct conflict with the rising Manchu power to the east. The Manchu leader Nurhaci, and later his successor Hong Taiji, saw Ligdan's ambitions as a mortal threat. They waged a decade-long war against him, rallying rival Mongol clans who resented Ligdan's dominance. By 1634, the conflict ended in the Manchus' favor. Ligdan Khan was defeated and driven west, dying soon after. In the aftermath, the southern Mongol tribes swore loyalty to the Manchus, bringing Inner Mongolia under Manchu control. This was a pivotal victory. The submission of the southern Mongols provided the Qing with not only security along their frontier, but also valuable cavalry allies who would fight under the Manchu banners in campaigns to come. It marked the beginning of a pattern, the use of Mongols to conquer other Mongols, and of one nomadic people to dominate the rest. With China now under their rule and Inner Mongolia secured, the Qing turned their gaze further north and west. Beyond the Gobi Desert lay Outer Mongolia, home to the Khalkha Mongols, and even further west, the Oirat Mongols of Dzungaria, the last great nomadic confederation in Asia. The Oirat Mongols had forged a powerful state known as the Dzungar Khanate, stretching across modern-day Xinjiang and parts of Kazakhstan. Under their leader, Galdan Boshugutu Khan, the Dzungars dreamed of uniting all Mongols once again, and for a time it seemed possible. In 1678, Galdan received the blessing of the Dalai Lama in Tibet, who declared him the mandate-holding Khan, the spiritual protector of the Buddhist world. For the Mongols, who had long embraced Tibetan Buddhism, this was no small matter. It made Galdan not just a military leader, but a divinely endorsed ruler. Emboldened, Galdan expanded his dominion across Central Asia, conquering the Uyghur Muslim oasis cities of the Tarim Basin and asserting his influence over the Khalkha Mongols to the north. His growing power alarmed the Kangxi Emperor, who saw in him a threat to Qing authority equal to any the empire had ever faced. In 1688, war erupted between the Qing and the Dzungars. For 10 brutal years, armies clashed across the Mongolian steppes. The Dzungars were fierce and mobile, their cavalry unmatched in speed and ferocity. Yet the Qing had advantages of their own: superior logistics, the vast manpower of China's interior, and the military genius of the Manchu commanders.
The Kangxi Emperor himself personally led one of the decisive campaigns. In 1696, he launched a massive expedition into the heart of Mongolia. The Qing armies advanced in 3 coordinated columns, a complex operation across thousands of miles of steppe, coordinated with almost mathematical precision. The plan worked. Galdan's army was crushed at the Battle of Zhao Modo. His forces scattered, and he died the following year. The fall of Galdan marked a turning point. With the Dzungar threat temporarily neutralized, the Khalkha Mongols swore allegiance to the Qing. Outer Mongolia now joined Inner Mongolia as part of the expanding Qing domain. For the first time in history, the entire Mongol world, once the conqueror of China, was under the rule of a Chinese emperor. But victory had not come from force alone. The Manchus understood Mongol politics deeply. They used diplomacy, marriages, and religious patronage to secure their control. Many Mongol princes were incorporated into the Qing nobility, while Mongol regiments were added to the 8 banners. The Manchu rulers also took on the image of the Great Khan, presenting themselves to their Mongol subjects as the rightful successors of Chinggis Khan's legacy. It was this careful balance, military dominance combined with cultural and political integration, that made the Qing conquest sustainable. Where earlier Chinese dynasties had failed to hold the steppes, the Qing succeeded by becoming part of them. Yet, even with Mongolia subdued, the Dzungar Khanate still loomed in the west, undefeated and defiant. Its surviving leaders regrouped in the mountains of Dzungaria, continuing to rule over the vast territories of what is now Xinjiang. From their strongholds, they still controlled the lucrative trade routes and the rich oasis cities of the Uyghurs, keeping the western frontier beyond the reach of Qing authority. To complete the conquest of Inner Asia, the Qing would have to face the Dzungars once more, and this time the war would reach all the way to Tibet and the borders of Central Asia itself. Legacy: the making of a giant. By the late 18th century, the Qing dynasty had achieved what no Chinese empire before it had done. Through war, diplomacy, and sheer ambition, they had brought Tibet, Xinjiang, and Mongolia under their rule, stretching China's borders across half a continent. The result was a vast, multi-ethnic empire, one that united farmers of the East with herders of the West, Buddhists of Tibet with Muslims of the Tarim Basin. It was not a single civilization, but a mosaic of peoples bound by imperial power. When the Qing dynasty fell in 1912, the Republic, and later the People's Republic of China, inherited these lands. And so the borders drawn by conquest 3 centuries ago still define China today. From a cluster of river valleys along the Yellow River, China had grown into a continental empire. And though dynasties have come and gone, that expansion, carved through centuries of struggle, remains the foundation of the modern Chinese state. This is how China became so big.